Today I thought I would go back to my little sketch of the car that I had on my painted background and kind of do step 2 today. I said before that I sometimes do my paintings in 1, 2, or even 3 steps over that many days as well, because I like to come back to my painting after I've spent an hour or 2 on it. I feel like my creativity sort of starts to wane a little bit, and so if I come back to it another day, I feel like I can do a better job and get more ideas and know what will look right and what won't. And so I have all my stuff ready to go. My whole setup is here. I've got my rag so I can dry my brush off. I've got my paint water. I have all my favorite brushes, the 2 jars of the different sizes I'll be using, itty bitty and small today. Got detail in the painting, so I'm not going to be using anything too big. The bigger brushes for my background, and that's mainly done. I have another palette that I'll be using, and all the paint colors that's kind of pulled out and decided will look best with the color scheme I'm going with on this painting. So I've got a whole bunch of different colors that I'll be incorporating in the background. And not sure how far I'll get on this painting today, but we'll see if I can at least get some of the background, figure it out. If you can tell, I went over my graphite lines with a Sharpie, because when you paint over your car, if you're painting over the graphite lines, sometimes those lines will disappear, but you might need them again because you might not quite be done with fixing up all the details. So if you put Sharpie and you paint over it with light colors, most of the light colors, you'll still see the Sharpie showing through. And so I do Sharpie, that way I don't lose my lines and I know where I'm going. On another car painting that I did, I made the windows clear, and so it was a little tricky to have to figure out where to put everything that you could see through the windows. Do I draw the steering wheel? Do I do the seats? Do I draw the other side of the car showing through the windows? And that part became a little tricky, and I felt like it was way more work than it needed to be. So on this car, I think I'm going to do tinted windows. That'll be the look I'm going for, and it'll make it a lot easier. And all I have to do is a little shine with some white on the window once it's painted, and it'll save me a lot of hassle. So right now, I think I'm just going to figure out what's going on in my background, figure out where my road is, and I'm going to take a pencil right to the canvas here. So my road, this is going to be on a dock. So that's where my road is going to be. The car is sort of parked here on a sort of, I guess, sort of like a causeway. And then there will be a little sidewalk cutting in here. Everything over in this area will be water. And so remember that your waters, the horizon, the edge where your water is going to look like it meets the sky, needs to be straight. So don't do that at an angle. Your road could be at an angle, but your top of your horizon line needs to be straight. And figure out how much water you want in this painting. I'll just do my water to about here because I still want to see some of that sky that I painted. And remember, when we did our sky, we knew we'd be cutting some of it away with our background and our little bit of a road that we need to add in here. So that's going to be where our water line is going to stop. That's as far as we can see. And it does create a little bit of depth. This does give the illusion that we can see for pretty far off into the distance. There's not going to be a sun or anything like that going on, because remember, this is an overcast day, so there's no bright sunny rays coming in anywhere, and there's no sunset. This is probably midday, and so the sky, the sun will be way up there somewhere. We can't even see it from this view. And you could use a ruler to map this out if you'd like. I'm also going to do some buildings off over here somewhere. So there'll be some greenery, some bushes over here, but there's also going to be some buildings. Let's figure out. Maybe a pretty big house over this way, or could look like a factory. So sketch something like that in. Give it a couple windows, but don't go crazy with the detail on something like this. It's far away. We wouldn't really be able to see that much of it anyways. So if you'd sort of like to leave it just like that, kind of save the rest of the space for some greenery. Right here, this could sort of be a big tree or a clump of some kind of a plant right there. And then we can't really tell what's going on here, but maybe this is another sort of a dock, just like where this car is parked. Maybe there's a sidewalk or something here, so we might even come in later and maybe could create some kind of a fence or something that's in between the water and the house. And something like that. I'm also going to want a little bridge here, so I'm going to draw in something here for cars to drive on to connect to where this house is to the other part where the car is driving. If you're good with something like this and you can eyeball it well enough to know you don't need a ruler, then just go for it. Or you could sort of figure out where your lines are going and make sure that as it's getting closer to you, it's getting a little bit bigger. In this case, a ruler might be handy to create some angled lines, almost like a triangle shape. We might imagine that the bottom of it is going to come like this towards us, so it's getting closer and further down, and then the top of it might have a different angle and it narrows as it goes down. So this might be where the top of that bridge is, and we just sort of let that trail off wherever that's going. And these little support beams will be going down into the water, so we don't need to show where the bottom of them are or what they look like down under the water. We just know this is where they're going to touch the water, roughly. And you can even do, if you're not really sure how to end your bridge or what's going on up here and what does that look like, just do some more plants right here. You can put a little shrub or something right here that could be growing on the bank or whatever areas over here. So create yourself a little space for that to happen. And your water can always come to this part right there. So we've got a couple of plants, and this will let us create a little more color in the picture too, because these bushes can have all kinds of little berries or flowers and blossoms on there, and it will just add to the color and theme of the picture. All right, because this is a dreary day, it's cloudy, not a lot of color in the sky. I'm not sure if you'd even want to put anything up here, but if you wanted to, figure out the size of the house and how big a person would be who's over here. Maybe you can have a couple people standing on your bridge, but those are all details that can come much, much later. All right, so let's start putting some color into this. I'm going to do my water first because that's a large section. I'm going to leave the sky as is. Kind of smudged it a little bit, but that comes right off. And then I'll maybe do the ground underneath the car. So let's start filling all that in with color. And I'm going to try to reflect a little bit of the color from the sky into the color of the water here. So let's maybe you'll imagine this is like a bay. Maybe not the cleanest water or the prettiest. It's not the beach or anything like that. So we might give it a kind of a choppy look. Maybe make it look like a river, kind of some dark water. And let's get those colors ready. Alright, so I mainly have my water area done. I know it's just a solid color right now. I sort of went with a mixture of the teal and the gray from the sky. I didn't do any of the white because that can come later. I'll figure out where I want my shine to be, where if there is a little bit of sparkle on the water, it won't be a whole lot, but somewhere in a corner wherever I decide my light's coming from, might be coming from this area right here, sort of shining down that way. But I just went around the car, went around those straight edges a little slowly. A lot of people try to sort of keep the brush elevated when they're making a straight line, and they get upset because their lines will come out shaky. So I always tell people, if you just smush your brush flat and drag it along slowly, you'll have much more control over the bristles and where they're going, especially if your bristles are nice and tight like this one. A good way to know is if you can flick the brush and it sort of snaps right back. While that's drying, let's figure out what color we're going to do down here on the road. I think I'm going to do sort of a brownish color. So let me get a few different colors of brown. I think I'll use just regular dark brown for most of it. And I might come in with a scruffy brush and tap in some yellow ochre, like this one, where I want a little bit of light. Maybe a little bit of this color. I like that a lot. It's an off-white color. I guess a little bit of black or gray would also work well in there. So I'll use this same brush that I was using for the water to paint mostly brown here on this part of the road that the car is driving on. Maybe it's a brick road, cobblestone or something. Maybe this is like an old area, like up in the New England area or somewhere like that near the water. So let's go ahead and do this whole area with our main color. And then I can come and tap some texture in with the scruffy brush to make it look like a road, to give it sort of a rough look with something like this. So the scruffy brush is pretty much just a beat up brush. Sometimes you can use the camel hair brushes. That's what this one is. It already feels rough, even when it's a brand new brush and it hasn't been used at all, hasn't had any time to get beat up. It's already feels rough. It's a rough texture. The hairs are thicker. They're not as soft as some of the other brushes like these. And so you can tell right away this one's going to be a good scruffy brush because it's rough and the edges are uneven. I only used the dark colors where I felt it was necessary. Otherwise, it might have looked too bumpy. I just want this to look like there's a little bit of texture here. It's some sort of asphalt, and so it's not smooth like pavement, because maybe it's an old road. But I did a little bit of shadow where I felt I needed it. Over here, I put some in the corner because we're not sure what's going on over here, but this is definitely the darker part of our painting. Remember, our light source is coming from over here. It's good to establish that before you start putting color down so you know where you're going to need to lighten up your painting. And that's why I hit this little area right here with some of these colors, the ochre and then the light yellow color, because I want it to look like this part of the road has some light shining on it while the other part is sort of in the shadows. And there might even be some plants or something that can come in later to help us with creating that effect. Underneath the car, definitely needed a little bit of the black and the dark brown to come in together and create a little bit of a shadow under the car. Of course, I did go on to my white area a little bit, and that's okay because I can clean that up later. But I just needed to do it for the effect, and I didn't feel like going in and putting painter's tape down, though you could if you really wanted to cut out some little shapes and make sure you don't cover those areas. You could use painter's tape for that, but I don't always like to cut the painter's tape. Let's go back to our water now. Let's sort of tend to that a little bit because remember, it has some areas where we definitely need to touch it up. It's got a lot of white showing, a lot of brush strokes, which can look kind of neat on the water area because it can make it look choppy like waves. But in this case, I don't really think it's giving us that effect. I think it gives it a sloppy look, like we just did a rush job going and putting all that on there. So let's touch it up a little bit. Let's get that good brush, or maybe even use this one. It's a little longer and softer, so they don't snap back nearly as quick or as easily, but I think it will still do the job. And we can come in and figure out where our light is going to be. Now we know it'll be on this area, and some shadow definitely over here under the bridge. So let's get that going. Now, it's a really good idea to get all your supplies out ahead of time, just like I did, getting all my paints, getting all my colors, having a pencil nearby in case I need it, having a Sharpie, having a ruler, everything you anticipate needing before you sit down to paint. Because if not, you're going to find that you sit down, you try to relax, this should be a fun experience, and then you get interrupted because you realize, oh, I don't have that color that I need. Oh, I can't find my good brush. Oh, I forgot to get a cup of water. All these things, if you get them ready ahead of time, you'll have a much more enjoyable painting experience, and you can get into that mental flow. The only way to do that is if you have that uninterrupted 30 minutes, an hour of painting time without being interrupted, without having to get up and get anything you need. So just make sure you have everything ready to go, no distractions, and you'll have a much more enjoyable painting experience. to come together nicely. I like the texture on the water now. I like that I've got a little bit of the dark on this part and some of the light over here. I did use a little bit of this coral color from the sky to stripe in right here where the light is coming. And notice that I kept all of my strokes for the water going the same direction. I pulled them horizontally, and I usually, if I'm putting the light on this side, I'll pull it from that side. I don't start here and drag it over. I pull from the edge that that kind of gets hidden over here. So I start here and just pull it onto the canvas and lightly lift up, and it gives it a wispy look, just as long as you're keeping your lines nice and straight. Same thing on the other side. When I mixed a little bit of the gray, teal, and black together, a little bit of all three of these colors, I just started at the edge rather than the center and pulling it outward. I started at the edge and pulled inward, and it gave us that straight edge look, pulling up lightly so that the end of it just trails off. Instead of having a very straight, bold, dramatic line that just ends abruptly, we have those light, soft lines that naturally just run right out of paint as we just gently lift the brush off the canvas in a sweeping motion. All right, so also I think when this comes in as a nice green tree or bush, I think I'll take a little bit of the green and want to reflect it on the water a little bit, and having a lighter color in this area right by the bush will help me to be able to do that. I can just dab a little bit or streak a little bit of green right here in this light area, and you'll see it a lot better than you would have if it was over in the darker part of the water. So I'm excited to try that out and see what that looks like. And even if you put a few little blossoms in your tree, you could even dab a couple little blossoms down here in the reflection on the water as well. The car might be one of the very last things I do. So mainly have all three of my major pieces of the background. I have the ground, the road that the car is sitting on. We have the water right here, the background, and the sky. And I also thought about if you're going to put a word or some sort of a phrase or something up in the sky would be a good place to put it. And maybe just one word. I have a lot of paintings that have something similar to that. Just a neat background and then one or two words to sort of dress it up and give it a neat effect. Like this one, it's got the bicycle on the bottom, so you have a lot of neat scenery. And then at the very top, it's got the saying, so it fills up that empty space and it doesn't look weird or boring. You have something to look at up in the top. I'm just going to wash and dry my brush, and make sure you dry these very well. You want to really squeeze those bristles dry. Get your thumb and your index finger around the bristles, squeeze them dry, and then flick it a couple times just to be sure that it's really, really dry all the way down to the bottom of this where the bristles are coming out of the metal. Because these are water-based paints, these are acrylics, these are not watercolor. They don't need to be watered down unless you're doing something different with them. Sometimes you do water down your paints. Sometimes if I'm going to do a glowy look around a star in the sky, if it's a night sky, or around the moon, I want it to look like it's sort of glowing and putting off a little bit of light, I will water down some white paint and just do a sort of a little ray around it, a little halo around that area where the light is coming from. Or sometimes you water down your paints, your white paints, and using a scruffy brush, you can dip it into the wet white paint. And if you're doing like a sky background, a night sky or outer space or something like that, maybe a galaxy, you can just flick tiny little stars all over your painting, and it does a really nice job of putting tiny, tiny dots that you could never paint that small with just a paintbrush. So that's a different look you'd be going for. Since we want solid colors that are totally opaque, we don't want to water these down. They are water-based, and watering them down more would just make them more sheer, a little transparent, and that's not what we want for something like this. Let's color in those bushes. Let's just end today with our greenery. Let's get that mainly blocked off. So I'm just going to use the darker green. I have two different greens. I'm going to use the darker green to just roughly paint some kind of wild shaped greenery in here. Remember, we don't know where this one's really coming from, if this is growing somewhere on the land or if it's somewhere near the edge of the water underneath a wall, but we'll just sort of let it be because it's far enough away that we don't have to show where it's coming from. Do this straight edge, keep that edge straight. Notice I'll press down and flatten my bristles. Let the bristles go the way they naturally want to go. Some people will find that they don't like the way their painting is turning out, And then I'll look at the way they're holding their brush, and I'll notice that they're fighting the bristles. They are not letting the bristles go the direction that they want to go. So pulling the bristles in the way they naturally want to go will give you a much better effect, and it'll help you get the look you're going for. If you try to go the opposite way, the bristles don't want to go that way, and they'll fight you over it. And you'll have a harder time getting a nice clean stroke on your paintings. All right, so I think that's good enough for those two plants. I've got a couple wild looking shapes there. They're not even, they're not perfectly round, they're not perfectly square, they're just wild, they're growing that way. And I will, while I still have green on my brush, I won't bother washing it. I'll just dip it into the black. So now I have, after mixing a little bit in the palette, I'll have a little bit of a darker green, which I can use to put shadow on the side where the light is not hitting it. So we know this side, the right side, is where the shadow would be because the light's not over there. And just dab it on roughly. The rougher you go with it, and the more you just sort of dab and let the paint do what it wants to do, the more realistic it will look, because it won't look purposeful. It will seem like it just happened that way. Remember, light on the left, because that's where our light source is coming from, and then the shadow on the right. Give it a whole bunch of different little shapes in there, some shadow wherever you'd have some shadowy areas on the plant. Just like that. If you want a darker shadow, then wash your brush, get all the green off of it, and just come in with just plain black. Dab it on. You might even choose to blow this dry and come back when you can do another coat right over it, or just paint on a little thicker like I'm doing right now. Okay. Now, when you're using a scruffy brush, or when you're just dabbing the color on like I'm doing, the more you dab, the more it will start to blend. So just like on the road down below, we tapped all over and kept going over and over the areas that we had already covered, and the more we did that, the more it started to blend together and look like one color. Now that was fine on the road, because we sort of wanted it to look like it was just almost a smooth road, although we wanted it to look like it had some little bumps here and there. But the tree, we want it to look far bumpier, far more textured than the ground. So don't mess with it too much, or it might end up looking like a smooth plant, and we know that plants don't grow that way. So just dab it gently and try not to mess with it too much, because the more you mess with it, the more you're going to lose that texture you just created. I like the amount of shadow that's on both of these plants, so I'm going to leave them like they are, and then wash my brush so I can switch to the light color. Because remember, the left side of the painting is where the light's coming from. And so let's get a little bit of the light green right here, with maybe just a touch of this light yellow on our brush at the same time. And see how we've loaded both of those colors on there at the same time. And then this can come in on the other side, and just little tiny dabs where the light would be. You can even drag some of it in between the shadowy areas, because maybe there'd be some areas that are sticking out a little further, and they do pick up some of the light, even in areas we don't expect it to. Like right over there. A little more of those same colors. All right. Yeah, there'll be some areas that are tucked away into the shadows where the light's definitely not hitting it, but then there are some other areas that are reaching out a little further, like plants like to do, so they can get that sunshine. They're so smart, they know to grow in the direction of the light. I think that's so cool. All right, I think that's enough on my greenery. I think I'll leave it just the way it is. I feel like if I mess with it anymore, I'm not going to be happy with the look of it, so I really like how it is right now. I will leave it just like that. And this is where I'll stop my painting for today. I can come back to it on another day to fill in the bridge, to figure out what color my building's going to be, do this little sidewalk area, and then maybe finally the car on that same day when I do the rest of the background. I also wanted to show real quick one last thing. Another way that you can do your palette. So this is a palette that you can buy that has the little wells for different colors of paints, and it's got the center area for mixing, and as you can see, it's been used multiple times. These are great for that because they can be used over and over. But you could also use something like this. This is just a plastic plate, or it could be like the bottom of a platter that you might get that had some cookies or something on it. So it's just some packaging that you might throw away. But something like this, you can always just use it as your mixing palette, let it dry, and then you don't even have to wash it. You can just come back and pour new paints right over it, and that's okay. Or you can even peel those pieces of paint off when they're dry and then throw it away and have a fresh surface to work with. So it's just a neat little other idea you can use if you don't have a palette like this or don't feel like going out to buy one. Don't buy anything you don't need because you probably have a lot of stuff already at the house that you can use. You don't need to go to all these expensive craft stores and buy all that stuff every time.